The first flakes of radioactive snow drifted across the shattered skyline, glinting in the thin dawn like bits of ground glass. Nikolai watched them settle on the warped balcony rail and dissolve with a hiss, each white grain carving a pinprick crater in the blistered paint. Below, what remained of Moscow lay quiet, no traffic, no voices, only the groan of a mutating wind that smelled of ash and iodine. A month earlier, the city had pulsed with 9 million lives. Now it was an echo chamber for memories. The warheads that fell on Europe, Asia, and the Americas in late August 2098 had sheared away the familiar world in less than 90 minutes, and the climate, already staggering beneath decades of abuse, lurched into a new mode, neither winter nor summer, but something feral and undecided. Inside the apartment, yellow tape exited the cracked windows, and sheets of mylar scavenged from an abandoned server farm were tacked over the worst breaches. Nikolai stepped back in, sealing the balcony door behind him. His wife, Anna, knelt at a dented basin, rinsing a stack of disposable respirator filters in boiled water that cooled quickly in the unheated rooms. Their children huddled at the table. 10-year-old Elysey spread a dog-eared geography atlas, tracing routes with a pencil worn down to its ferrule. Pelageya, 7, clutched her plush hair by the ears, a toy gone gray with soot but still miraculously soft. A single candle smoked on the counter beside the empty induction range. The electricity had died after the second electromagnetic pulse, and the hydrogen fuel cells downstairs were drained. For heat, they burned broken furniture in a stovepipe barrel perched over the tub, venting through the demolished ceiling into the apartment above, whose occupants had never returned. The improvised funnel sang whenever the wind shifted, a mournful metal throat that announced each gust. Nikolai slid a roll of map paper from his jacket. The leather was stiff, the seams white with salt from long exposure. Eastern corridors are gone, he reported in a voice hoarse from filter dust. Radiation counts spike east of Yaroslavl. South is still hottest. But northwest, toward the Lakes District, there is a corridor. Scouts from the Ostankino repeater say the dosimeters stay green past Tver and into the Valdai Hills. Anna squeezed water from a filter, her knuckles red and chafed. Green today, she answered, but what about tomorrow? The jet stream is broken. Fallout drifts like a drunk. And the lakes, if they caught strontium rain, they'll glow for decades. Elysey looked up from the atlas. There's forest in Valdai, he said. Trees drink radiation, right? Teacher said pine needles capture isotopes. Sponges with needles, Nikolai corrected gently. They capture, but they hold. Still, the image of forest canopy filtering poison out of the air offered a fragile hope, a natural roof older than war, doing what it had always done, only now the stakes were existential. They ate in silence, a tin of black bread chips, 2 spoonfuls of honey, a cup of powdered soy gruel thinned with water condensed from the mylar sheet overnight. Afterward, Nikolai carried Pelageya to the bedroom they had consolidated into a single insulated cell. He tucked her beneath quilts fragrant with mothballs and kissed her forehead where fine hair had begun to thin, a side effect, perhaps, or sheer malnutrition. When he straightened, he found Anna in the doorway. We have 3 days of filters, she whispered. For if we wash them again. Then we move in too, he replied. The departure felt less like a journey than an amputation. At dawn they descended the 32 flights of stairwell, boots echoing in the concrete shaft where emergency lights flickered like distant lightning bugs. Each carried a rucksack of shrinking essentials, charcoal tabs, iodine, LED wick lamps, 2 pistols with a combined 13 rounds, and the family samovar, because Anna refused to surrender the ritual of tea. Nikolai bore a Geiger-Muller counter in a padded case. Its calibrated clicks had become the new heartbeat of their world. Street-level Moscow was a canyon of crushed facades, snow and dust filling the voids where pavement had buckled into magma-black fissures. They moved quickly, heads down, following alleys mapped in Elysey's notebook. The boy advanced with startling assurance, calling out wall tags left by volunteer couriers, cyan arrows for passable routes, crimson skulls for gamma spikes, and a violet spiral meaning water found. The family paused at one such spiral, spray painted on a bank vault door, slipped inside, and pumped a rusted handle until cloudy liquid trickled from a cracked fire hose nozzle. Anna dosed it with iodine and passed the canteen. By noon they reached the garden ring. Here, radiation pockets were worst. The Kremlin strikes had unleashed dirty isotopes that still gusted on capricious thermals. Nikolai raised the counter, 30 microsieverts, 45 too high for comfort but low enough to dash across the open boulevard if they kept breath shallow and didn't stumble. They timed their sprint between flurries. Pelageya, smallest, darted first, rabbit-quick, plush hair flapping like a ragged standard. Anna followed, then Elysey. Nikolai lingered, eyes scanning ruined storefronts. He spotted movement, a figure swaddled in surgical plastic, face hidden behind mirrored ski goggles. The stranger raised a homemade crossbow. Nikolai dove, landing in churned slush as a quarrel shattered the pavement. He rolled, fired a warning shot from his pistol, the muzzle flash anemic in pallid light. The crossbowman retreated into shadows and Nikolai bolted, lungs burning, Geiger counter clattering against his chest. They did not speak until they reached a half-collapsed metro entrance smelling of ozone. Inside, mural tiles had peeled like frostbitten skin, revealing artillery scars in the tunnel concrete. The family descended rails crusted with snowmelt into a realm below frostline. Glow tape arrows led them past stashed caches, network efforts of survivors who used the metro as both shelter and conduit. One sealed alcove held boxes of canned roast buckwheat labeled with a strip of tape reading, "For anyone, but take only what you need." They stuffed 3 tins into packs, leaving the rest. In 2098, the true currency was decency, hoarding invited reprisal, and rumors spoke of cooperative militias who enforced fairness at gunpoint. A kilometer down line, at a junction where 5 tunnels met like spokes, crowds murmured around barrel fires. Some wore municipal hazard suits faded to ghostly aquamarine, others wrapped themselves in hotel curtains or ballistic blankets. A wiry woman with a drooping cybernetic implant played balalaika whose wooden body bore acid burns. She plucked a fractured lullaby that echoed off dripping arches, and for a moment Anna closed her eyes, allowing the notes to thread through memories of summers before climate shift, before the ozone partitions failed, before solar storms, before every scrap of sky was a threat. Nikolai traded half his honey for 2 vacuum-sealed respirators from a logistics medic. The man accepted with weary gratitude, explaining the honey would disinfect burns in an infirmary down tunnel. He slipped a folded flyer into Nikolai's palm, a map of rumored safe zones across the former Russian Federation, blue dots indicating collectives with water recyclers and microfusion cells. One dot pulsed in the Valdai uplands, labeled Svetoch, the beacon. That night, in an abandoned sleeper car, the Lazutins shared lukewarm tea brewed over a battery stove. The candle flicked shadows across Anna's cheekbones, once full, now drawn like lines on thin parchment. She opened her diary, paper scarce, pages precious, and inscribed a single sentence, "We are still us." Then she tucked the book beneath her pillow and coaxed the children to sleep. Nikolai lay awake, listening to distant tunnel voices fade, and weighed the possibility of Svetoch. Safe havens were often mirages, places devastated before refugees arrived, or traps set by raiders who collected Geiger counters and gold fillings with equal fervor. Yet the name stirred something, beacon. A light in dark water. If anywhere still honored the lost idea of community, perhaps it was among the ancient pines and glacial lakes, the same forests that once inspired icons and folktales before reactors poisoned the watersheds. He resolved to press on at first light. The surface welcomed them the next morning with an ochre haze. High-altitude soot had bent sunrise into a permanent bruise, rendering color theory obsolete. As they trudged northwest along the skeletal remains of the M10 highway, they encountered a winter without snow. Permafrost surrendered to radiation-driven thaws, then refroze, sculpting the terrain into buckled tiles. Scrub pines leaned at impossible angles, warped by hormonal mutations within their meristems. Pelageya began naming them King Crooked, Queen Bent Needle, Princess Sideways, and the game lightened each kilometer. Mid-afternoon, they heard drone rotors. 6 black hexwings skimmed the horizon, scanning with blue lidar beams. Nikolai herded the family beneath a toppled cargo trailer and watched through a crack as the machines maneuvered, algorithms weighing wind vectors. One drone fired a flare, another released a canister that burst into chaff, raining foaming pellets onto the highway. The pellets hissed on contact, absorbing residual toxics. Emergency decontamination units? Or territory markers for a faction? When the drones vanished, Nikolai scraped a pellet sample into a vial. If they reached Svetoch, its engineers might glean use from the compound. They walked until dusk bruised to black. Geiger clicks remained tolerable, the corridor held. At a rest stop overgrown by thorny lab willow, a species genetically engineered in gentler decades to neutralize heavy metals, they camped in a security kiosk. Anna prepared buckwheat porridge. Steam fogged the kiosk's cracked plexiglass as Pelageya recited a poem remembered from school. In quiet woods the silver wolf goes walking on the leaves of dusk. Her voice wavered between lines. She did not know the ending, her teacher never taught it. So she invented one, and Elysey applauded softly as if in a library. That night, the wind shifted. Radiation surged, alarm on the counter screaming 40, 50, 80 microsieverts. Anna wrapped scarves around the children's mouths, doused the barrel fire, and sealed the kiosk vents with duct tape. They shivered in a dark thick with dread as invisible particles punched at their marrow. By morning, counts subsided, but Anna's gums bled when she brushed. She hid the cloth. They resumed the trek, slower now, Anna pale but determined. 3 trucks rusted into a ditch formed a makeshift barricade across the road. Graffiti read, "Turn back, plague." Beyond, the asphalt was blackened as if by flamethrowers. They detoured through birch undergrowth, compasses unreliable beneath geomagnetic disruptions. Once they stumbled upon a frozen pond where fish floated belly up, scales reflecting an aurora of oil slick. Nikolai noted coordinates for future avoidance. A week after leaving Moscow, the family reached the outskirts of Tver. The city's silhouette was a forest of skeletal radio towers. As they approached, a bell tolled, a clear bronze chime incongruous amid ruin. They followed the sound to a cathedral whose onion domes had mostly peeled away, revealing rusted lattice ribs. Inside, dozens of survivors knelt in pews, not praying but listening to a woman speak from the altar. She wore a white lab coat, its breast pocket embroidered with a blue caduceus. "And so the dosage remains within modifiable parameters," she said, voice amplified by a solar-powered loudspeaker. "We cannot promise heaven, only half-life. Those who wish to migrate must register before sundown. Convoy departs tomorrow." Nikolai exchanged glances with Anna. "Convoy to where?" He navigated the aisle, waited for the assembly to break, and confronted the speaker. Her name tag read, Dr. Sabina Keller, Ural Biocore. When he asked about Svetoch, her gray eyes brightened. "The beacon exists," she affirmed. "Our drones supply it with antimutagens. But the road beyond Vyshny Valakiak is contested by raiders. We move people in armored carriers twice a month under drone escort." "Cost?" Nikolai asked. "Medical screening. If your isotopic burden is low, you ride. If high, you stay and receive palliative care." Anna squeezed his arm. "You promised the children." "I promise truth," he murmured. That evening, in a side chapel repurposed into triage, technicians drew blood from each family member. Machines the size of lunchboxes hummed, analyzing. Results scrolled onto e-paper displays, counts low for the children, moderate for Nikolai, borderline for Anna. Dr. Keller frowned. Her marrow shows chromosomal bridges. Transport policy forbids passengers above threshold. They risk acute failure en route. "No," Nikolai whispered. "Then none of us go." Anna's lips trembled. "You will," she said. "You must." Pelageya, sensing tension, clung to her mother. Elysey stood stiff, fists balled. Dr. Keller looked away, unable or unwilling to intervene. Anna took Nikolai aside beneath a fractured fresco of angels' missing faces. "Listen," she said. Her voice was steady, but her pulse throbbed at her neck. "You will take them. I remain and seek treatment. Perhaps threshold drops, perhaps next convoy. The next convoy may never come." He felt his eyes burn but refused tears, salt dehydrated. "In that case," she replied, forcing a smile, "I will find my own road. I have the samovar." Nikolai wanted to argue, but the children watched. He tasted the iron tang of defeat and of necessity. If he sacrificed the chance now, all 4 might perish. But abandoning Anna felt like cutting the future in half. He thought of the beacon, a light flickering in forest dark. What good was a light if it left shadow where his heart should be? Night settled, and outside, irradiated snow began to fall again, each flake sizzling as it met the thawing ground. Inside the cathedral, barrel fires cast halos on cracked icons. The Lizutin family huddled in a pew, the children between their parents, their breaths forming one trembling cloud that rose and vanished into the nave. And somewhere beyond the silent bells and broken domes, a convoy engine rumbled to life, counting down the hours until departure. The cathedral's nave echoed with the low-frequency hum of diesel turbines idling outside, a basso continuo rattling stained glass shards in their lead casements. In the pre-dawn murk the convoy assembled, 3 retrofitted Tiger armored cars bristling with welded rebar, followed by 2 personnel carriers grafted from bus frames and tank tracks. Above them, a swarm of hex-wing drones pivoted in lazy orbits, their LiDAR beams flickering through the radioactive drizzle like searchlights in a submerged city. The air smelled of wet copper and thawing asphalt, even the snow seemed hesitant, melting in midair before reaching the ground. Inside the registration alcove, Nikolai signed the manifest with a charcoal pencil that left a greasy smear on the Tyvek clipboard. Anna stood beside him, shoulders squared, as though posing for a photograph whose negatives would be sealed in a family archive that no longer existed. She pressed the clipboard flat to keep her hands from trembling. Elysey silently memorized the rows of names, not from curiosity, but from a survivor's reflex to tally the living. Pelageya traced the faded thread pattern in Anna's coat sleeve, the plush hair clamped between elbow and ribs. When the medic announced that boarding would commence in 10 minutes, Anna knelt and zipped Pelageya's parka to the chin. "Remember to change filters every 6 hours," she said. "And keep the charcoal tablets dry." Her Russian acquired the deliberate cadence of someone filming instructions for a time capsule. She brushed a strand of hair from Elysey's forehead, leaving a wet streak where her palm lingered. "Help Papa with maps. The North Road fractures after the 3rd viaduct, detour along the service line." Her voice cracked on the word north, a fracture as specific as any viaduct. Nikolai adjusted the straps on his pack until they bit into his clavicles, an anchor that hurt enough to feel real. He slipped Anna's diary from an inner pocket and tried to hand it back, but she closed his fingers around the battered notebook. "It belongs where the children are," she murmured. "Write me the chapters, one miss." She pressed her lips to the back of his hand in lieu of farewell. A horn blared. Steam coughed from exhaust stacks capped with jury-rigged particulate scrubbers. Passengers filed out in double rows, 20 meters apart, to minimize clustered exposure. Dr. Sabina Keller, still in her smoke-gray lab coat, strode the line with an augmented reality slate, flashing green icons over each cleared traveler. When she reached Anna, she paused, thumb hovering between icons, but Anna shook her head. Keller's stylus dropped to red. No debate. At the carrier ramp, Pelageya hesitated, twisting like a leaf tethered by a single vein. She began to speak, perhaps to promise return, perhaps only to say she loved her mother, but the drone chorus overhead surged, drowning words in rotor wash. Nikolai lifted his daughter, turned, and climbed into the carrier's hold. Elysey followed, jaw rigid. The ramp hissed shut, sealing them in a narrow steel cylinder that smelled of machine oil, army blankets, and human fear. Through a slit viewport, Nikolai watched Anna diminish on the cathedral steps, a pale silhouette amid saffron snow. She raised one hand, palm outward, stop or stay safe, or simply goodbye, and then the convoy lurched, tracks clanking over shattered cobblestones, bearing her family away like an outbound organ transplant. The city receded in a swirl of irradiated sleet. Convoy protocol dictated that interior lights remain off to avoid backscatter that might silhouette passengers for snipers. Darkness became its own geography, bodies transformed into warmth signatures sensed through shared blankets, breaths mapping coordinates by sound. The only illumination came from the soft green raster of a HUD visor worn by a militia guard named Ruslan who sat near the ramp with a belt-fed Saiga resting across his knees. His visor displayed telemetry, radiation gradient, wind vectors, drone positions, and occasionally pulsed red when a metric spiked. Each time it pulsed, passengers clenched. Nikolai leaned close enough to read. Counts hovered between 10 and 20 microsieverts, tolerable for short exposures. When they crested a bridge over the Volga's frozen ribbon, the visor flared yellow, 37. Ruslan tapped the bulkhead twice, the lead driver accelerated, chains clattering like thrown bones, until the numbers ebbed. Pelageya dozed against Nikolai's ribs, her plush hair folded like a sleeping bat. Elysey, however, remained upright, eyes reflecting ghost light from distant fires along the skyline. "Those are flare pits," Ruslan explained when he noticed the boy staring. "Pilots drop incendiaries into burn zones to sweep radio-seeded dust. It's like bleeding a patient, drastic, but sometimes the only cure." He spoke without moving lips, as if the sentence had been learned by rote. Hours blurred. The convoy passed through concentric rings of devastation, industrial estates charred to graphene skeletons, suburbs where polymer siding had melted then hardened into alien drapery, pine barrens whose trunks spiraled like giant screws, mutations accelerated by flux storms. Each new vista suggested the Earth was reinventing architecture without architects. Near noon, the vehicles halted beside a toppled telecom tower repurposed as a checkpoint. Drones landed to recharge from roof-mounted induction pads, folding wings with insectal precision. Passengers debarked in file to eat, relieve, and stretch. A field kitchen ladled out broth brewed from lab-cultured algae. The broth tasted of salted seaweed and nickel, but it was hot, and heat now ranked just below oxygen as a luxury. Nikolai caught Keller consulting with convoy commander Artyom Serebryakov, a broad-set man whose respirator mask bore hand-painted shark teeth. Nikolai approached, clearing his throat. "Dr. Keller, any update on my wife?" he asked, surprised by the steadiness of his voice. Keller removed her mask, revealing half-moons where elastic had pressed her cheeks. "Threshold patients remain under observation," she replied. "We'll know more in 72 hours. The marrow can surprise us." She tapped her temple implant, a gleaming brass jack socket. But hope without data is just gambling, Mr. Lizutin. Focus on getting your children to the beacon. Artyom chimed in. Road ahead is the Tilika Strip, Raiders' favorite for tolls. Drones can handle skirmish, but if they roll out heavier ordnance, well, pray they're low on ammo. A woman serving broth overheard and laughed, a short, humorless bark. Raiders low on ammo? Ammo is religion out here. Elysey edged closer to Nikolai. We still have 7 rounds, he whispered, inventory as catechism. Nikolai nodded, though he doubted their sidearm would matter against anti-material rifles. Still, he appreciated his son's calculation. Numbers gave fear a frame. Soon horns sounded, signaling redeparture. Passengers reboarded, bellies warmed. As the ramp rose, Pelageya tugged Nikolai's sleeve. Papa, why did snow turn yellow? She pointed outside where flakes caught sunlight like sparks within amber. He considered a lie about sunrise angles, then opted for partial truth. Sulfur from the upper fires came down with the snow. It colors the crystals. She nodded solemnly, as if sulfur were a mischievous spirit rather than chemical fallout. Beyond the checkpoint, the highway narrowed, guardrails tangled by tectonic frost heave. Concrete flora sprouted rebar petals and icicle stamens. The lead tiger deployed plow arms to shove wreckage aside. Twice, scouts dismounted to manually detonate unexploded ordnance with shaped charges cobbled from fertilizer and graphite rods. Each boom quivered the carrier hull like a great animal shrugging. At kilometer marker 211 they found the first toll. Burned buses barricaded the road, welded hubcap shields overlapping like dragon scales. A banner fashioned from parachute silk read Sedon ARMA, a Latin letters 6 meters high, their meaning moot but menacing. Raiders in scavenged has-suits lounged behind the wall, rifles resting on lawn chair arms. The convoy halted 30 meters back, drones formed a phalanx overhead, laser designators dotting raider breastplates. Via loudspeaker, Artyom proposed trade, medical kits and biograde filters in exchange for passage. A moment's pause, then laughter crackled from the raider PA, distorted into cyber gargle. They demanded the drones themselves, engines, batteries, flight controllers. Keller shook her head. Negotiations collapsed. First volley, a raider RPG shrieked toward the lead tiger. Mid-flight, a drone intercepted, skewering the warhead with a tungsten spike, shattering it in a white magnesium flash. Simultaneously, 2 drones dove, spinning counterrotors to generate downdraft cyclone. They released canisters of micronized irritant, non-lethal to filtered passengers but debilitating to maskless gunmen. Raiders scrambled for cover, firing blind into the sky. Inside the carrier, Ruslan toggled safeties off. If hull breach, stay low, he instructed. A lattice of tracers swept above, drumming the roof like drill bits. One tracer penetrated, ricocheted off a ceiling rib, and spit sparks across blankets. Passengers shrieked. A woman clutched her ears so hard they bled. Through the slit viewport, Nikolai glimpsed Elysey's reflection, eyes dilated, jaw clenched, but the boy never ducked. Instead, he watched patterns of fire, searching for logic within chaos. After 3 minutes, raider guns sputtered, magazines dry. Drones wheeled overhead with the grace of predatory birds who know the hunt is over. Artyom's voice thundered, disarm and disperse or next barrage is lethal. Few illusions remained about what lethal meant now. The barricade cracked open. Raiders in patched coats slunk away, leaving rusted rifles on the asphalt like dried snakeskins. The convoy advanced. As they passed, Nikolai saw a teenager among the raiders, face blistered, eyes amber with thyroid swelling, staring with unmasked envy at the armored Salvation rumbling out of reach. For a heartbeat, compassion twitched, but he quelled it. Survival demanded triage not just of bodies, but of empathy. The rest of the day unfurled under charcoal clouds. Radiation gradients spiked then ebbed like fever charts. Twice, Artyom rerouted down logging spurs where pine trunks had erupted in tumor-like burl clusters. Conveyor hum mingled with drone wing beats, a duet of fossil and future technologies. By dusk they reached the Tilika River, whose iron-rich water steamed despite sub-freezing air. Bridges were gone, ice floes jostled like plates of shattered tempered glass. Engineers deployed modular pontoons coated with lead polymer foam. Passengers were asked to walk across in small groups to lighten vehicle load. The footpath swayed, hot mist smelled of rotten eggs and old coins. Halfway over, a woman slipped, her boot plunged through a fracture, scalding water surged around her calf. Keller and Ruslan dragged her up, but flesh had already whitened from chemical burn. She bit her sleeve to stifle screams. Pelageya clutched Nikolai's hand so tightly blood stopped in his knuckles. They bivouacked on the opposite shore, erecting conductive tents that diffused static charge from erratic storm cells racing overhead. Lightning spidered across clouds, but thunder arrived minutes late as though the sky's neurons misfired. Ruslan issued sleeping tablets to keep panic dreams at bay. Most passengers swallowed them dry. Nikolai declined, unwilling to cede any more vigilance. While the others slept, he wandered to the river rim where Keller knelt collecting water samples. Her slate backlit her face, highlighting grooves of exhaustion. "Is it always this bad?" he asked. She capped a vial. It was briefly worse. After the strikes, isotopes saturated biosystems. But life adapts faster than we expected. New bacterial clades synthesize chelators in days, not decades. "I'm cataloging them. Might be our antidote." She stood, joints cracking. "Your wife's file, marrow proliferation slowed overnight. That's encouraging." Hope flared, then immediately wounded him. Hope now felt like touching a live wire to test if current still flowed. "Thank you," he said, voice raw. Before returning to camp, he opened Anna's diary under a tense, dim photoluminescent strip. Blank pages weighted like fresh snow. He wrote, September 27, 2098, Tilika Banks. "Children asleep. Sky flickers like dying neon. I miss you with every neutron in my body." The graphite blurred where moisture dripped from his nose. He wasn't sure if it was condensation or tears. They broke camp at dawn. The drones, having recharged from kinetic wind turbines strung overnight, resumed perimeter. Terrain rose. The Valdai uplands emerged as rolling hummocks dusted with amber lichen. Pockets of undamaged forest appeared, pines straight and green, centuries-old sentinels spared by wind direction and luck. Geiger clicks diminished to single digits. Passengers exhaled as if freed from invisible chokeholds. Near midday, the convoy braked at a switchback where an old Zakaznik sign, Nature Reserve, still stood, though its paint had peeled to ghost letters. Ruslan announced, 15 clicks to Svetoch. The word carried along the carrier interior like light spilling through a cracked wall. At kilometer 13, electronic chimes replaced engine noise. Drones broadcast a coded tone. Ahead, the forest parted to reveal an array of tall pylons strung with ceramic coils glowing faint peach, a Faraday dome perimeter. Beyond, on a plateau, clusters of geodesic pods shimmered beneath solar film canopies. Wind turbines rotated with hypnotic slowness. The beacon. A gate slid open. Technicians in pristine white exojackets motioned the convoy inside. As the first vehicle crossed the threshold, a harmonic buzz tingled Nikolai's fillings. The dome neutralized residual charge and scanned isotopic loads. Green strobes signaled clearance. Passengers erupted in applause, ragged, half disbelieving. Inside, everything smelled of wet soil and ozone filters, not ash. Raised beds sprouted kale and lab-morphed potatoes under LED spectra. Water gurgled in transparent aqueducts where carp glided. Children emerged, smiling, robust, carrying tablets streaming animated tales. One boy offered Pelageya a crimson apple. She stared as though it were a mythical gem, then accepted with reverence. Medics guided newcomers to decontamination suites. Showers sprayed chelating foam that clung then sloughed, pulling isotopes away. Nikolai watched gray water swirl into sealed grates. They were issued soft hemp coveralls, slippers, and reusable respirators with nanofiber membranes. After Deccan, a triage nurse scanned retinas and implanted subcutaneous ID chips, infrared visible tags key to nutrition allotment. The procedure stung less than a mosquito but marked an irrevocable shift. They were citizens of the beacon now, or perhaps wards. A docent led them through a central atrium, a cathedral of living systems. Vertical algae tubes spiraled 3 stories, exhaling oxygen. Between columns, holographic displays showed live rad maps of surrounding zones, drone patrol arcs, energy budgets. Atop a mezzanine stood an elderly man draped in a coat of woven photovoltaic thread. His hair glinted silver as solder tinsel, lenses over his eyes mapped vitals of every person below. "Welcome," he intoned, voice amplified by bone conduction rails in the floor. "I am Director Lev Zaretsky. Here we do not promise paradise, only probability. Probability that tomorrow exists. Aid us and probability increases. Probability. Another kind of hope, this one wearing calculus instead of wings." Zaretsky dismissed them to orientation pods. On their way, Nikolai noticed a wall of portrait screens, each displaying the same woman, Anna, hair damp, arm raised, smile muted but unmistakable. Beneath the image scrolled the caption, "Inbound recovery candidate, vitals stable, ETA 34 hours. Nikolai's knees weakened. Keller appeared beside him, handing a printout of telemetry graphs. "Your wife will arrive with the next convoy," she said. Threshold receded below cutoff. She insisted we broadcast update down the line so you'd know. Pelageya squealed and hugged her father's leg. Elysey exhaled a breath he seemed to have held for 60 kilometers. Keller squeezed Nikolai's shoulder, an awkward physician's gesture turned intimate by circumstance. For the first time since August fires, Nikolai allowed himself to feel relief, pure and unalloyed. He looked up at the vaulted greenhouse glass where real sunlight, filtered through stratospheric dust, painted wan rainbows. They were faint, but they were not illusions. That night the Lazutans settled into a dormitory pod lined with bioceramic tiles that glowed faintly, tuned to circadian rhythms. Nikolai tucked the children into bunks, each outfitted with blankets woven from spider silk protein. On the wall, a flat screen displayed a tranquil lake scene sourced from pre-war archives. The animation looped gently ripples, reeds swaying, a loon calling. It felt indulgent after weeks of grimy reality, yet necessary like salve on a burn. When the children slept, Nikolai took Anna's diary to the communal terrace. Above, the Faraday dome arcs sang softly in wind, harmonic overtones sliding like distant whale song. He opened to a fresh page and wrote of apples and spider silk and the promise of Anna arriving with dawn. He wrote of raiders who fled, of trees who stood, of rivers that burned yet birthed bacteria capable of eating poison. He wrote of probability. A shuffling footstep startled him. Director Zaretsky approached, leaning on a carbon cane. "We chronicle," the old man said, nodding at the diary. "Story is vector. Without narrative, data is noise." Nikolai closed the book, uncertain how to respond. Zaretsky continued, "Tomorrow we will assign roles. We judge not by past credentials but by adaptability. I sense in you a cartographer. The new world requires new maps. Maps require stability," Nikolai replied. "Not the old kind. Dynamic maps, ones that redraw themselves to the pulse of change." He tapped the cane. "The beacon itself is a map, a moving point of low entropy. Stay flexible and you'll help us extend its perimeter." They stood together in companionable silence. Somewhere, an alarm chime sounded, a gate correction, routine. Zaretsky shuffled away, cloak whispering. Nikolai remained until condensation beaded the diary cover. Then he turned lights low and slipped into his bunk, pulling the plush hair in beside Pelageya, whose breaths fluttered like moth wings. Outside the dome the world shuddered, but within the beacon, night held. Somewhere down the road, an armored carrier rolled under escort, cradling Anna toward the light. An hour before sunrise, the beacon's outer strings began to vibrate in atypical harmonics. A subtle discord that slid beneath ordinary hearing and registered instead as nausea. A seasick lurch in the gut of anyone standing close to a dome rib. Nikolai was on pre-dawn survey duty, logging vapor flux differentials along the eastern pylons with a handheld lidar slate when the feeling hit him. He steadied himself against the carbon lattice, forcing slow breaths past the taste of copper that flooded his mouth. Two technicians farther down the catwalk were slumped to one knee, cradling temples. The moment passed like a ripple, leaving only questions. Nikolai tapped an alarm glyph on his slate. A soft gong radiated through maintenance channels. By the time he reached the control hub, the harmonic had ceased, but diagrams on the central holopole glowed amber. Director Zaretsky leaned over the projection, eyes flicking from metric to metric. "Subsonic interference," Keller reported. Hair knotted in a hurried coil. "Origin grid point 46 Charlie, 3 kilometers outside perimeter. Not seismic, vector too clean. Possibly a directed resonance burst." "Raiders?" Nikolai asked, though he already doubted it. The beacon's neighbors preferred crude artillery and intimidation gestures. Purposeful subsonics felt beyond their means. Zaretsky stroked his silver beard as if tuning it. "Unknown. Dispatch a triad to investigate. Keep drones at 40-meter ceiling. If they engage, answer with dazzlers only." Keller nodded. "We can't risk a kinetic reply on soil this shallow. Water table would bleed isotopes into the greenhouse basins." The triad left within minutes. 2 ranger cyclists in exopadding and a microcrawler bristling with sensor booms. Elysey begged to join. Mapping the anomaly counted as fieldwork, but Keller vetoed. The boy was bright, still fragile. He conceded, asking instead to monitor telemetry from ops. Keller relented, assigning him a junior console. Pelageya hovered behind her brother, hugging the plush hair whose fur carried a faint detergent scent now that laundry cycles were free of radiation dust. Nikolai remained at ops until the crawler's feed reached real-time. On screen, skeletal birch trunks glided past under dawn's bruise-violet light, frost fumaroles curling up from peat. The crawler pinged toneless notes as it stitched a point cloud. When the ranger team reached grid point 46 Charlie, they found a tower, makeshift but sophisticated, constructed of composite ribs scavenged from weather masts. At its apex, an array of parabolic plates angled skyward. Painted across the scaffold in reflective polymer was a symbol. 2 concentric circles bisected by a vertical line, the gap between circles filled with dots like stars. Keller inhaled sharply. That's not radar iconography. Zaretsky's pupils dilated behind ocular implants. It's Arcadian, old thermodynamicist cult, thought extinct after the Saratov purge. Nikolai recalled rumors. Technologists who believed the warming catastrophe was a chrysalis phase, that humanity must accelerate entropy to trigger an evolutionary leap. Their doctrine flirted with weaponized weather, trading local habitable zones for a planet-scale equilibrium no one else consented to. The crawler sniffed radio frequencies. A narrowband pulse emanated from the tower every 8 seconds, modulated with phase codes Elysey recognized from cryptography lessons. He overrode caution, piping the stream into an analyzer. Glyphs resolved. A call-and-response handshake awaiting completion. "They're trying to talk," the boy said. "Or bait us," Keller countered. Zaretsky's hand hovered over the comm diode, twitching. Risk of silence equals risk of reply. A dialogue may diffuse conflict. Nikolai thought of Anna, finally asleep 2 pods down after a late marrow rinse, and weighed risk. Open a read-only channel. Let them speak first. Keller executed. A synthetic voice poured from speakers, feminine but toneless, as if stitched from statistics. "Beacon Enclave. We greet you in Vector 16. Your dome sings notes of containment. Containment stagnates. We invite phase coupling to amplify survivability envelope. Share your lattice code and we will resonate the dust to upper troposphere, clearing ground air across 500 clicks. Refusal equals local suffocation when polar vortices descend. Timer 90 hours. Silence followed, thicker than any drone downwash. Within minutes, an emergency quorum convened in the amphitheater. Engineers, agronomists, wardens, medtechs, a mathematics chair once tenured at Novosibirsk. They debated beneath kinetic infographics spiraling overhead models of plume vectors, enthalpy budgets, population dose curves. If Arcadians could indeed loft fallout into stratospheric conveyor belts, regional radiation might drop, but stratospheric injection risked ozone tears and continental hoarfrosts. Trade a slow death for an unknown quick one? Anna sat beside Nikolai, her eyes bright yet shadowed by lingering neutropenia. "Entropy zealots talk alchemy," she whispered, "but sometimes alchemists accidentally forge medicine." By midday, the beacon issued a provisional reply. Request for in-person parley on neutral ground under drone observation. Within hours, a delegation arrived. 3 figures in basalt gray cloaks, faces masked by optically neutral visors. They carried no weapons, only staffs tipped with tuning forks that hummed against the air. Negotiations unfolded in the Arboretum, a place where living chlorophyll might remind each side of stakes beyond doctrine. The lead Arcadian, who identified as Sister Helix, spoke with disconcerting calm. She explained their tower as the first of a ring. Each node would propagate infrasound, shaking microparticulates loose from boundary layers, pushing waste skyward where photonic shear would dilute them planet-wide. A controlled sacrament of dispersion. "You hoard purity," she told Zaretsky, voice echoing among citrus leaves. "Your dome's clarity is a local maximum. We pursue a global optimum." Zaretsky countered with thermodynamic charts showing how their resonance could induce runaway ice nucleation, plunging latitudes into instant winter. Sister Helix smiled behind her visor. "Ice is another form of shelter if you prepare." Talk spiraled. Both sides traded equations like fencers' parries, Keller and the Arcadian second scribing ISO lines across a transparent slate. Meanwhile, rangers patrolled catwalks, rifles set to stun but hands tense. Pelageya, who had slipped from Anna's watch, stood at the Arboretum threshold, intrigued by the visitors' forked staffs. She raised her plush hair in greeting. One Arcadian noticed and bowed, causing harmonic overtones to shimmer through glass. Leaves quivered. Hours stretched. No consensus emerged, only a deferral. Beacon would simulate the Arcadian proposal in their quantum cluster overnight, deliver verdict by dawn. Sister Helix accepted, leaving a crystalline prism the size of a plum, our handshake token, then departed under escort, cloaks fluttering like matte wings. That evening storm clouds massed low, gravid with electrostatic potential. Nikolai joined the simulation team, his mapping algorithms repurposed to model aerosol drift. They fed in tower coordinates, pulse frequencies, tropospheric shear histories. The cluster hummed, a hive of entangled qubits borrowed from pre-war fintech servers. At 2:17, the render spit its verdict. Arcadian resonance would indeed thin ground-level isotopes by 40% within beacon radius, but 10 days later stratospheric sulfate density would eclipse Mount Pinatubo's benchmark, deflecting solar flux enough to drop global temperature 4 degrees. Crops outside domes would black frost. Oceans would absorb less carbon and churn acid. A minor ice age to buy a century's grace, perhaps before equilibrium reasserted unknowns. Zaretsky stared at the hologram's final panel, a blue-white planet gleaming like polished quartz, beautiful and alien. They're willing to sacrifice the current generation for the next, he murmured. Typical utopian arithmetic. Keller folded arms. We reject. Yet rejection carried risk. Arcadians might activate towers unilaterally. Repurposed missile interceptors could hammer the structures, but Beacon's armory held only 3 scramjets, none guaranteed beyond perimeter. Diplomacy, sabotage, or acquiescence, none felt certain to preserve both ethics and lives. As dawn paled the sky, alarm klaxons sliced the hush. Surveillance drones reported energy spikes at 2 Arcadian towers not yet revealed on maps. Sister Helix had moved schedule forward. Beacon Rangers scrambled. Keller loaded her medical drone swarm with CH-11 disruptor plasmids, coded viruses that ate piezoceramic circuits. Nikolai volunteered to guide the strike team using his freshly minted dynamic maps. Zaretsky assented, though Anna's face tightened. She said nothing. Their eyes held the conversation. Return or don't, but leave me memory, not regret. He kissed her behind the ear where hair still grew in fine wisps and followed the Rangers to the hangar. They deployed on turbocycles, small enough to weave forest debris, fast enough to outrun gamma flares. Elysey tried to stow aboard, caught by Ruslin, who shook his head. The boy retreated, hands balled, promising himself next year he'd earn his place. Nikolai's cycle bucked onto frosted loam. Drone escorts overhead pulsed infrared beacons that stitched the canopy with invisible thread. The target lay 9 kilometers north near an abandoned junction town. Once a roadside motel cluster, now half sunk in peat. En route they passed an anomaly. Fields of crimson moss glowing faintly. Ranger Masha confirmed via portable dosimeter the glow was bioluminescent, not radioactive. A new species seeding warmth for unknown purpose. The world kept rewriting itself while humans argued entropy. They arrived at Tower Delta before Arcadians had completed calibration. Only 2 cloaked acolytes guarded base anchors, adjusting gyro mounts. Keller's swarm hissed from launch pods, a cloud of glitter that homed on ceramic and burrowed, enzymatic payloads quick deactivating piezo stacks. The tower's hum faltered, dropped an octave, silenced. Rangers secured acolytes with plasticuffs, confiscated visors. Tower Epsilon, however, was already active. Its resonance rolled through the ground. A drum nobody heard but everybody felt. Eyes watered, teeth rattled, drone stabilizers jittered. Masha fired a grapnel grenade. Cable looped a lower strut, but the hum intensified, fracturing ice plates into frost geysers that flung shards like throwing knives. One Ranger took a sliver through cheekbone, dropped. Decision forked, retreat and bombard from afar, or rush control platform now before full amplitude. Ruslin chose rush. Nikolai followed, pulse sinking to the resonance. Steps felt muffled yet elastic, as if tower warped local gravity by fractions. They ascended lattice ladders into a vortex of soundless vibration. At the core, a crystal reactor spun, levitated between superconductive rings. Ruslin leveled his Saiga, Nikolai grabbed barrel. A slug might breach, release unknown plasma, he warned. Instead, he jammed the Arcadian handshake prism, confiscated from Helix, into the field of foreign seed. Frequencies clashed, heterodyned into chaos. The levitating core fluttered like a heart experiencing fibrillation. Light speared outward, lancing forest gloom. Nikolai yanked Ruslin back down ladders. They dove as the tower convulsed. A brilliant white flash, then silence. Snowflakes drifted. The tower still stood, but its plates hung limp, resonance lost. Mission near success, but victory too quick breeds blind corners. From behind a peat ridge, an Arcadian sleeper unit emerged. 8 figures hefting a portable Gauss mortar. They fired not at rangers but skyward. Shell burst mid-air, releasing a colony of microsats, mirror flechettes deploying solar sails. Once at 30-kilometer altitude, they would function as reflective nodes for subsonic coordination across continents. Sabotaging towers now only delayed orchestration. Ruslin cursed in 3 languages. Ranger comms erupted. Beacon had nothing that reached those heights. Drones were atmospheric, not orbital. Keller's swarm couldn't climb vacuum. Options? The mortar team prepared second volley. Nikolai's map overlay pinged a line-of-sight solution. The old Ostankino spacelift cannon 20 kilometers east, rumored defunct. But if residual power remained, a single rail slug might screen the flechettes before full dispersal. He pitched the idea over comms. Zaretsky approved. Desperation trumps decay. A skeleton crew peeled off. Nikolai, Ruslin, Masha, 2 engineers. They rode cycles flat out, engines whining protest. The ground blurred into streaks of birch and crimson moss. Along the way, static crackled. Stratospheric dust devils birthed lightning ropes that struck Earth, igniting sonic booms. They dodged one crack that fused sand into glass tesserae still steaming as they passed. Ostankino Tower appeared like a lanced spear hafting clouds. Its launch deck, half collapsed, jutted over a funicular shaft that once ferried cargo to rail cannon breach. Inside, darkness smelled of ozone and rust. Emergency capacitors, long uncharged, might hold ghost juice. Masha spliced power taps from cycle batteries into the rail's superconductor bus. Indicators fluttered amber, then steady green, just enough for one shot. Engineer Vadim loaded the slug. A tungsten rod engraved with Cyrillic for luck. Target data? Elysey. From beacon he'd hacked drone scope arrays, triangulating flechette swarm trajectory. Keller routed coordinates to Ostankino, elevation 48 degrees, azimuth 72. Nikolai keyed them into archaic interface, fingers gliding on cracked glass. Capacitors whined, the note ascending toward unbearably bright pitch. Firing! He stabbed manual trigger. No recoil, only a sunlight-white bolt as rail magnets spat the slug at 9 kilometers per second. Tore through cloud smear, vanished. Silence again. Vadim held breath. Ruslin muttered prayer. Then, sky blossomed in a brief aurora as tungsten met flechette cluster. Sensors back at beacon registered microdebris field scattering harmlessly. Mission thread green. Relief sagged knees, but celebration waited until cycles limped back through twilight. Beacon gates opened. Families lined catwalks. Anna waited at the ramp, cheeks wind-pink under dome filters. Nikolai stepped off bike into her arms, energy shaking more than fatigue. Pelageya wrapped both with hair and all. Elysey stood a pace back, trying to appear stoic until Keller tousled his hair, calling him our ground station savior. The boy grinned without restraint. Arcadian prisoners were processed, treated, not tortured. A fact Sister Helix would learn when Keller broadcast medlogs as proof. Arcadian command replied with unexpected grace. They halted tower activations, requesting joint study of aerosol ethics. Zaretsky agreed to scientific exchange under dome neutrality. War transmuted into dialogue, fragile but factual. Weeks passed. Winter crept, yet beacon thrived. Nikolai resumed mapping, this time charting networks between enclaves sprouting like fungal mycelia, knowledge corridors to outcompete entropy. Anna co-founded a school where children learned old literature and new protocols. Pelageya, ever naming things, cataloged mutations in forest biota, gifting whimsical Latin nicknames that researchers later formalized. Elysey apprenticed under Keller, designing second-generation drones that sang counterharmonics as environmental therapy. One dawn, Nikolai climbed the highest dome rib. The air tasted almost like ordinary cold metal, pine, distant smoke. On the horizon, auroral veils shimmered where Arcadian mirrors still drifted, their threat converted into data relays piping weather telemetry to every community that asked. He opened Anna's diary, a habit now communal, entries penned by each family member. On a fresh page he wrote, "Entropy managed is not entropy conquered, but it is time borrowed. We will spend it wisely." Below, in greenhouse corridors, seeds bred for radioactive soil began to sprout true leaves. Outside, the world continued its slow, baffling metamorphosis, but inside, stories accumulated, vectors of meaning bending probabilities curve. His breath rose, merged with dome haze, and dissipated into morning. The solstice sunrise came thin and brittle, a pale filament stretched across the sky like wire about to snap. Even so, every soul inside the beacon rose before first light, streaming onto catwalks and mezzanines to greet the horizon. Tradition, director Zaretsky insisted, strengthened lattice more than any ceramic strut. A community was held together by shared moments of deliberate awe. Against the pastel glow, the Faraday dome's ribs shone the color of old champagne. Frost traced each arch, refracting sparks whenever a breath of wind nudged the filaments. Children pressed mittened hands to the glass, leaving fog prints that evaporated, replaced at once by fresh circles of wonder. Nikolai stood near the zenith hatch, jacket unzipped despite the cold. Months of exterior patrols had thickened his blood. Beside him, Anna balanced a copper kettle and 4 tin cups on a tray, a portable echo of the samovar now enshrined in the beacon canteen. She had gained weight, healthy weight, and a mischievous streak that surfaced whenever quarantine protocols allowed small breaches for celebration. Today, she had smuggled black leaf tea from the greenhouse's experimental camellia plot. The air would taste of tannin and citrus for an hour, and that seemed a good omen. Below, in the drone hangar, Elysey paced half-circles around a corkboard plastered with equations, fine-tuning the launch burn for his latest invention, the Dove. A photosynthetic glider designed to ride thermal columns beyond the dome and drop seed wafers into sterile soil. He wore a harness festooned with ratcheting tools and looked more mechanic than boy, his cheeks, though, still pinkened at Anna's whistle from above. He waved, mouthing ready in 10. Pelageya, crouched behind him, fed data tags into the Dove's ventral bay, labeling each wafer with botanical DNA signatures she herself had edited. Larch with manganese sequestration, bracken that glimmered turquoise when its fronds absorbed cesium, sunflower's fat with edible oil and isotopic indifference. The plush hair rode in her pocket, now fitted with a patch that read Botany Aid, First Class. Ruslan and Masha joined Nikolai on the catwalk, lantern smoke curling from mugs of broth. Masha nudged Nikolai's shoulder. Survey liaison at the Eastern Moat says Arcadians brought a gift. A glass flue containing microorganisms that metabolize methane at -15. They claim it's a wedding present. Nikolai raised an eyebrow. Whose wedding? Masha grinned and jutted her chin toward Dr. Keller, below, adjusting her augmented visor around silver-streaked hair while Sister Helix tucked a blossom of crystalline algae behind the doctor's ear. Keller's laugh rang out, carrying above the drone hum. Looks self-explanatory, Ruslan said, half amused, half awed. 2 years ago, the Arcadians had been one detonator away from atmospheric gamble. Now their emissary was slipping into Beacon society like a new organ stitching to the vascular system. The community stirred as a pulse of amber light rippled along the dome ribs, signaling cable resonance was nominal. Zaretsky's voice, ever calm, floated from discreet speakers. Fellow caretakers, today marks 24 months since the beacon first achieved positive energy surplus. Our reserves allow us to extend lattice northward by a further 30 hectares. Celebrate not the expansion of walls but the expansion of breath. Applause answered, muted by gloves yet no less fervent. In the greenhouse galleria, vast bays of kale and potato terraces had given way to color, tomatoes the shade of coals, peppers striped like monarch wings, dwarf citrus exhaling perfume into air that no longer smelled only of iodine scrub. The algae towers thrummed softly, and newly installed resonators converted surplus vibration into charge for perimeter drones. Efficiency begot artistry. Rows of LED arrays flickered in spiraling gradients, only partly functional, the rest purely beautiful. Nikolai and Anna descended to the plaza where tables had been rolled out, each piled with bowls of grain pudding and slivers of cured mushroom charcuterie. Music drifted from a hand-cranked phonograph repaired by an elder who used to tune Bolshoi acoustics. The tune, Rachmaninoff's vocalize, swelled, notes bending under slight mechanical waver so that sorrow and hope braided inseparably. Mid-morning, the Dove prototype made its maiden flight. Elysey, now 14, delivered a brief speech in rapid technical Russian, then pivoted to crisp English for the Arcadian guests. He spoke of Bernoulli glide ratios and chlorophyll efficiency, but his eyes betrayed giddy terror. Keller squeezed his shoulder, stepped back. The hangar doors opened, wind rushed and smelling of resin and distant snow. With a prayer to lift wings, Elysey released the tether. The Dove leapt, solar film flashing, caught an updraft over the pine tops and spiraled higher until only telemetry proved its existence. Cheers erupted, Pelageya danced in a circle, hair aloft like a baton. Within an hour the Dove pinged first dispersal complete, seeds misted across an ashen meadow previously too hot for life. Subdermal chips broadcast the news in gentle pulses along everyone's forearms, soil activation initiated. Probability curve of external arable recovery ticked up by 0.07%. It was a decimal most would never parse, yet their hearts recognized the significance. A universe is built of small decimals. The celebration paused at noon for remembering. Tradition required equal weight to grief and joy. The beacon bell, recast from shrapnel and broken plumbing, told once for every resident lost since the convoy arrived. 13 strikes, each vibration climbing the dome like a chill. Faces lowered. Names scrolled across monofilament banners, those taken by long-acting isotopes, by accidents on survey, by despair too potent for medicine. When the bell stilled, Keller stepped beside Sister Helix and recited the promise of conservation. Any life gone must become structure for those remaining. On cue, archived recordings of the departed spoke single chosen words: laughter, ember, wildness, trust, words algorithmically woven into the lattice's ongoing resonance. In this way, the beacon literally sang with their memories. Afternoon brought the council summit. Delegates from 5 enclaves arrived via skimmer or crawler, the Icewell Collective from the far north, wrapped in sealskin composites, the Steppe Coil, nomads who rode giant wind sleds across permafrost, the Cyan Shard. A floating rig city adrift on the Volga remnants, the old Metro League, risen from Moscow's catacombs, and the Arcadian chorus, their hieroglyphic robes traded for utilitarian gray. They met in the Oculus Chamber, a hollow sphere lined with flexible OLED panels displaying live feed from each settlement so no representative sat in exile from home. Nikolai attended as cartographic advisor, his dynamic maps now the lingua franca of inter-enclave logistics. He presented the latest overlay, corridors of acceptable exposure stretching like translucent veins across the continent. Gaps remained, particularly a band to the southwest where fallout storms still boiled, but green arteries now connected communities that once dreamed of each other only as rumor. Debate centered on the next leap. Should the beacon network attempt synchronous resonance pulses to thin the fallout corridor, thereby opening passage to the black soil belt where dormant granaries might be restored? The Steppe Coil favored bold action. The Icewell Collective warned of unforeseen polar amplifications. Keller proposed a pilot, modest amplitude, real-time monitoring, auto-abort thresholds. Sister Helix pledged Arcadian tower arrays to the test, a gesture of trust. The Metro League offered subterranean stabilizers to anchor shockwaves. Agreement coalesced like frost crystal. Zaretsky ratified the pact. Operation Freshet would begin in 60 hours. Success promised not just corridor clearance, but proof that cooperation could out-engineer catastrophe without relying on old-world sovereigns or singular geniuses. That night the beacon glowed with purposeful anxiety. Engineers calibrated domes, agronomists accelerated leaf assays, children, sensing storm-edge tension, played more quietly, building miniature towers from mycelium bricks. Anna supervised the canteen, brewing tea so strong it cut through dread. She found Nikolai on the exterior parapet, sketching tidelines of dust visible only at twilight. "You're mapping stars on land now," she teased. "Every dune of fallout is a moving constellation," he replied. "If we're wrong about Freshet, those dunes shift places we cannot predict." She touched his sketchpad, smearing a granulated plume with her thumb. "We've spent 2 years writing probability into lines. At some point we must trust people to walk them." He exhaled and closed the pad. "Let's make sure the lines hold." Freshet day broke beneath slate clouds. Beacon core diverted 90% of storage to containment capacitors, non-essential lights darkened, hallways lit by emergency phosphor paint. In the command nest, Keller, Helix, and a panel of data refractors monitored seismic arrays. Drone constellations occupied preset nodes above each dome, lasers aligned to triangulate any unexpected vortex. Nikolai's role was the external eye. With Ruslan and Masha, he manned a scout crawler stationed on Ridge Alpha, 3 kilometers out, where he could verify ground truth against telemetry. Elysey, resentment tempered by diligence, served as remote systems deputy, cross-checking drone attitude control and seed dispersal locks in case freshet upset their orbits. Pelageya, under protest, remained with Anna in the infirmary greenhouse, inventorying iodine chews and bone marrow injectors. At 12 o'clock, Universal Time coordinated the arrays synced. 12 towers, Arcadian, Beacon, Metro League, began a low harmonic, barely audible, more felt in molars than heard. Screens plotted infrasound amplitude versus containment coefficients. At 12:02, they reached target threshold. A slender pause held breath across multiple settlements. Then Command issued the surge. Shockwaves invisible but profound rolled outward, a ripple through particulate strata. Crawler accelerometer spiked, the ridge beneath Nikolai vibrated like a living throat. Above, dust clouds convulsed, bulging upward into the upper troposphere. Monitors showed rad readings plunging along the corridor's spine, success flags blinked teal. 12 minutes in, a secondary oscillation emerged, unexpected, phase shifted by 90 degrees. The Metro League stabilizers compensated, but readings from Tower Echo flickered red. Structural strain, resonance bleed. If Echo collapsed, the pulse would snap, potentially dumping the lifted fallout back in a poison blizzard. Masha gunned the crawler toward Echo's coordinates, but ground quaked into slurry, peat beds liquefied by waveform interference. Over comms, Helix admitted structural welds had been jury-rigged with compromised alloy, corrosion misjudged. Ruslan swore. No drone could arrest a tower of 40 tons. Nikolai scanned terrain, a fractured monolith of pre-war highway jutted nearby, tilting toward Echo's base. Can we lever the failure? He muttered. Perhaps, if they could purposely topple the tower outward, its energy would dissipate laterally instead of down the corridor. A destructive save. Ruslan prepped thermite charges salvaged months ago. They skidded the crawler to the slab, planted charges along its fulcrum. Detonation would require manual trigger, blast radio frequency risked interference. Nikolai volunteered, strapping a backup respirator in case particulate geysered. Papa. Elysey on comms, voice small. Your dosimeter reads high already. Keep the corridor open for your seeds, Nikolai said. That's the map now. He sprinted, snow and ash crunching. The resonance beat against his ribcage, half music, half threat. He wedged the igniter, checked angle, calculated gravity vector in a glance grown preternatural from years of fieldwork. The slab was the perfect battering ram if pivoted at 40 degrees. Clear. His shout barely audible above hum. Ruslan yanked the manual cord, thermite roared sunbright. Nikolai dove behind a hummock. The slab bucked, pivoted in slow-motion dread, then thundered downslope, striking Tower Echo near midpoint. Metal shrieked, joint plates sheared. The tower leaned farther, then fell outward, exactly as hoped, carving a trench of sparks. Energy bled into earth with a titanic hiss, seismic graphs dipped into safe range. The corridor held. Dust stormed over Nikolai, suffocating. His respirator clogged, alarm squealed. He pressed face into snowpack, filtering through ice. Moments later, Ruslan and Masha hauled him up, dragging him toward crawler shelter. His dose badge flashed amber but not red, salvageable. Across the networks, Freshet's primary cycle completed. Radiation meters recalibrated, corridor levels now below coastal thunderstorms of the old century. Avalanche risk persisted, but atmospheric clearing was undeniable. Within hours, Sentry drones broadcast first images of dark soil, river shard glimpses, outlines of grain silos still standing after decades in shadow. Beacon Plaza erupted in cheers that reached even the infirmary greenhouse. Pelageya spun beneath tomato vines, scattering petals like confetti. Tears glinted on Keller's visor while Sister Helix whispered thanks in a language without consonants. Nikolai spent 2 nights in isolation ward as chelators flushed his bloodstream. Anna kept vigil, reading aloud from the diary, now a thick codex, its spine patched with sap lacquer. She recited Elysey's entry about the dove's glide, Pelageya's poem to the luminous moss, her own note, entropy negotiates, not dictates. When Nikolai's fever broke, they celebrated with contraband tea and silence sweeter than song. Spring advanced with improbable haste once the dust veil thinned. Sunlight regained yellow hues unseen since the war. Outside the corridor, teams reported like an awakening, buds probing. The cyan shard rig broadcast sighting of migrating geese, ragged formations but genuine, calling over acid-scarred water. The steppe coil caravans reached the black soil belt after 3 weeks' trek. They planted barley test plots. When sprouts emerged, a truncated cheer spread across every enclave channel. Photos, Old Russian shorthand for "It's alive." 5 months later, a second dove fleet lifted, this time in company with Arcadian mirror kites that steered thermals. Nikolai joined aerial survey, piloting a gimbal drone that stitched swaths of emerald where once grayscale reigned. He overlaid routes for future convoys, no longer armored but laden with seed barrels, solar spools, literature tablets. The map updated hourly, every new green pixel a promise. In late summer, the beacon hosted its first inter-enclave festival. Paths between domes had sprouted market stalls of woven hemp garments dyed with flower pigments. Children from Icewell's school performed a shadow play about photons negotiating with snowflakes. The Metro League choir sang spirituals learned in tunnels, voices deep as train echoes, harmonizing with Arcadian tuning forks to weave subsonic chords that made chest bones resonate pleasantly. During Twilight finale, Elysey took the podium, now voice cracked by adolescence. He unveiled the unified lattice charter, relationships not of dominance but of resonance management, every enclave a note in a perpetually tuned chord. Signatories etched digital signatures shaped like sound waves. Sister Helix etched last, her wave identical to Keller's, proof that once opposing frequencies could sync. Pelageya, 11 and insatiably curious, guided visiting children through a glow garden where genetically coaxed flowers illuminated paths nightly. She held her hair, for now patched many times, but she assured newcomers its scars each held a story. She knelt beside a sprout of crimson moss, whispering observations into a wrist recorder, cataloging how its glow dimmed in pure air, proof it thrived on toxins, nature's emissary of penance. Nikolai wandered to the outer railing, diary under arm. The sky overhead shimmered with faint aurora, but on horizons the stars re-emerged, real stars, not radion bursts. He opened to a blank page, pen poised. For once he felt no urgent need to outline risk or corridor parameters. Instead he wrote of things becoming ordinary again, the squeak of a wheelbarrow, the bewildered delight on someone's face after tasting a fresh apple, the sensation of waking and realizing the Geiger counter stayed silent all night. Anna approached, looping her arm through his. "We were atoms," she said softly, repeating a phrase from an old poem, but atoms yearning to combine. "And now," he asked. "Now we're molecules. We'll be cells next." She nodded toward the plaza where Keller and Helix danced, where Ruslan juggled LED orbs for laughing toddlers, where Zaretsky leaned on his carbon cane watching it all with quiet, exhausted pride. Soon maybe an organism grander than any single shelter. They stood until the aurora faded, replaced by darkness thick and serene. Somewhere a doe drone whispered overhead, guiding ultraviolet spectrum across seed rows that did not need it but thrilled under touch. Somewhere beyond hearing, dunes of fallout still shifted, but slower now, as if even the dust considered new possibilities. Nikolai closed the diary and slipped it into Anna's satchel. "The story can rest a night," he said. They walked back inside as the first crickets, offspring of a frozen lab colony, sang tentative chirps in the herbarium, writing their own small rhythm into the lattice of a recovering world.